A little while ago, we took a look at Celebrity Deathmatch, one of the few tournament fighters I really liked as a kid. But I'm no stranger. I know this genre has started and ended more friendships than war. I know it's a genre that separates the wheat from the chaff, the strong from the weak. You'll know you're in the vicinity of a heated Mortal Kombat or Smash tournament by the heavy scent of BO in the minefield of piss bottles, but hey, that's neither here nor there, I don't judge. And even though tournament fighters are not my forte, I of course have played all the important ones, but they could never really capture or retain my attention the way fantasy or action games could. And again, I'm not saying these types of games are bad, they're just not for me. However, one of the few that I always liked as a kid was Clayfighter 63 1/3. It just checks all the boxes for me. It has humor that's so bad it's good, it has parody, the animations and moves are wacky and creative, and the characters are all very unique. But before I get carried away, a brief history of the series. First, in 1993, we had the original, made by Visual Concepts and released on the Super Nintendo and Sega. The Tournament Edition would release a year later. Then, in 1995, Clayfighters 2 Judgment Clay released. This time developed by Interplay, and finally on the N64 and once again developed by Interplay, we had Clayfighter 63 1/3, followed by the Sculptor's Cut Edition a year later. It's the exact same game with a few changes and characters added in, I'll explain it a bit more later. But after 63 1/3, nothing. The series kinda just went on ice. I mean, there was a cancelled entry on the PlayStation and another on Wii, but as far as I can tell, these were only cancelled due to Interplay selling the Clayfighter IP. But still, the series didn't even get a shitty butchered port on the Game Boy. It got nothing. Which makes me think that in a world full of reboots and remakes, this series would just be begging for one or the other. However, Clayfighter 63 1/3 was received very poorly, to put it nicely. It seems nobody really liked it, and who can blame them, with scores ranging from 85 at its very highest all the way down to 24, but most of the scores sat below 50. A review from IGN stated that Clayfighter 63 1/3 would remain a prominent title in the N64 library for years to come, because the game is so terrible it sets the standards for bad. It takes bad to a whole new level in fact, and then to a level after that. GamePro summarized: slow action, forced humor, fuzzy speech, frustrating combos, cheesy AI, the game's practically a laundry list of what not to do without good gameplay. GameSpot stated, you really have to wonder what a company is thinking when it puts out a game like this. It simply can't compete with a real fighting game in any category. Even if the graphics and music were great, the game would still play terribly. Yikes, well, those reviews really took the wind out of my sails. I mean, I loved this game as a kid, and it sucks to read all this. In any case, let's get into it and see just how bad this game is. Does anyone remember Clayfighter 63 1/3? From the outset, there isn't a whole lot to say about this game, as it didn't have the cultural impact of Mortal Kombat or the fun for all ages of Smash, or even the recognizable characters of Street Fighter. It's just scrappy old Clayfighter. Which is funny because this series was conceived as a parody of Street Fighter back on the SNES and Sega. But beyond all that, there isn't a whole lot of content on offer. The game is relatively bare bones, even when compared to games like Mortal Kombat 2 or hell, even the original Clayfighter. But for now, let's go over the story. Basically, the game takes place on the Isle of Claymodo. A purple meteor called Bessie crashed on the island. Bessie carries an element called bok choy. Bok choy is needed to make— the story is so dumb. Basically, the main baddie Dr. Kiln is making clay henchmen out of Chinese cabbage, apparently, in order to take over the world. This is where the evil characters come from. While all this is happening, a cruise ship called the SS Manure capsizes just offshore on Rubbage Reef. That's where the good characters come from. So there are good and evil characters in the game, but these allegiances don't really play into or have any effect on the gamer's story at all, so who really cares? All things considered, the story mode itself isn't too difficult. Sometimes it does feel like the AI just shits on me for a minute straight and then goes back to sucking again, which is such a strange phenomenon. Either that or the AI would just get stuck. They just stand there and do a random ranged attack over and over again. In any case, I didn't have much trouble finishing the story at all, at least on medium. And while we're still on the topic, the story mode is kind of disappointing and unfulfilling. Unless you do some research or a specific block of text pops up at complete random, you won't know your character's motivations or intentions, or why they're even fighting. On top of that, the story is over and done with way too soon. only taking me about 15 minutes or so to finish. But even with how short it was, I didn't feel like I was progressing, if that makes any sense. It was just fight this guy, fight that guy, then fight the next, then bam, I was going up against Dr. Kiln, and this boss fight, if you even want to call it that, just played like every other fight in the game. There were no stakes and zero pageantry, turning this fight against the big bad Dr. Kiln into basically just, there's another asshole for you to pummel, have fun, see you in 60 seconds. I really wish they would have made this fight a little more intense, or at least given him a funny intro or something, or even made him more difficult to beat than the others, which he wasn't, but hey, I guess it is what it is, disappointing as shit. And while we're talking disappointment, I gotta mention the soundtrack. All the songs are silly, creepy, or intense in mood, but none of them are anything to write home about. They're not bad by any means, just incredibly average. Take a listen. Earlier, I mentioned that this game had another edition, the Sculptor's Cut, and just like you'd expect, this edition made a few changes and improvements along with re-adding some cut characters. They also added an intro song / cutscene explaining the story, which for some reason is different in that version. Along with Clayfighter Tournament Edition, Sculptor's Cut was also a Blockbuster exclusive. For those who perhaps don't know or don't remember, Blockbuster was a chain of rental stores way back when. They could have bought Netflix for cheap, but they didn't, and Netflix murdered them. Anyway, now that we're all caught up, the Sculptor's Cut being a Blockbuster exclusive means that it was only manufactured in relatively small quantities, about 15,000 to 20,000 total, thus making it rare as shit, so rare in fact that it's actually one of the rarest N64 cartridges out there, demanding outrageous prices online. This is perhaps the only scenario in which, as a collector, I'd be perfectly happy just getting a repro cartridge and calling it a day. For real, what do you want? A brand new car or a down payment on a house, or a limited run of a subpar N64 tournament fighter? Choices, choices.
Let's get ready to crumble! Fight! Clock you!
Moving on. The most important element to these types of games is the character lineup, and I don't really have a whole lot to say about all the characters, as some of them are, in my opinion, pretty boring, but there are a few amusing and fun ones on the roster. And I mentioned this above, but you can get more background info on each character, if you're lucky. Sometimes if you leave the game alone and clutch your lucky rabbit's foot while a blue moon is happening, the game will get sick of waiting for you and display a rolling text block that explains the specific character's background and why they're fighting. But it's at complete random, and I have no idea how to get specific ones to pop up. I suppose you could always just look them up online, but why not make these blurbs a part of the character selection screen? Make me hit Z or something to see them. Regardless, I don't have a whole lot to say about characters like Bad Mr. Frosty, Bonker the Evil Clown, or even T-Hoppy the straight-edge cyborg bunny. They all play okay, they're just not as funny or as interesting as the others. Then there's Taffy, and what a strange character. I mean, I suppose they're all strange in their own ways, but like, his name is Taffy, which would suggest he's made of, well, taffy, I'd assume, unless it's like a stripper name like Condi or Candy, but everyone else is made out of clay, so that means he must be made out of clay too, right? Unless he's an alien and this planet's main species is derived from clay. And while we're on this train of thought, what do they make their pottery out of? I don't know, I'm so confused. Can I eat him or not? I don't know. In any case, Taffy is a fun, zany character to play as, with some humorous lines and wacky moves. Then there's Earthworm Jim, and I mean, he's Earthworm Jim. I don't feel the need to explain him, but just in case you weren't born in the 90s and don't know who Earthworm Jim is, he's, well, Earthworm Jim. From the hit game, Earthworm Jim, and the cartoon called, you guessed it, Earthworm Jim. Honestly, he's the only character aside from Boogerman who isn't from Clayfighter natively. But you couldn't ask for a better fit. The humor of his games goes hand in hand with the humor of Clayfighter. Next is Hoongan, a voodoo shaman who uses rubber chickens, a walking stick, and a ceremonial mask as weapons. One of my playthroughs for this video was with him, and he's really fun to play as. I especially like his mask surf attack. Next up is Blob, and as the name suggests, he's just a blob of clay, but he's one of the funniest characters in the game. Being simply a blob allows him to take on many forms, which plays into the whole clay thing really well. He can change shapes to become a hammer, a bottle, an anvil, or a cannon, just to name a few, and his voice lines and victory emotes are top notch.
I'm all pumped up.
You win!
I'm a planet.
You win!
Ichabod Clay is quite a weird character. He was always my favorite as a kid. He's a wisecracking ghost with a silly voice and a jack-o'-lantern head. He's based off of a character called Ichabod Crane from a short story written in the 1820s called The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. But we all know Ichabod Crane from Johnny Depp's portrayal of him in Sleepy Hollow. But what a stretch though, to make a character based off of another character from what was at the time a 170-year-old short story? Fucking metal, man, keep it going. And last is Kung Pao, and man, he's gotta be the most offensive stereotype of a character I have ever seen. He's got huge hands and feet, big teeth, a bowl cut, and he's wearing a karate outfit. I mean, come on, he attacks with nunchucks, chopsticks, and a wok. Yeah, the joke here is as subtle as an atom bomb over Hiroshima. Nonetheless, he's a really funny character and surprisingly enjoyable to play as. There are also 3 unlockable characters, Sumo Santa, Dr. Kiln, and Boogerman, and I mean, they're alright. Sumo Santa is actually pretty funny and plays similarly to Bad Mr. Frosty with his air attacks. And Dr. Kiln has some cool attacks too, but Boogerman just grosses me out, and his humor seems incredibly forced. I'll stick with Blob and Kung Pao, thank you very much. One thing that does kind of bother me is that Bad Mr. Frosty is the mascot of the series. Why? Why not Blob? You think he'd be perfect in that role, but no, here's a snowman or whatever for the front cover of our silly parody game, who by the way isn't funny at all. That's like having Sweet Tooth not be a sadistic serial killer clown. I know there are a lot of Twisted Metal fans out there, just ignore Twisted Metal 3 for this example, okay? I'm getting to that game, have patience. It just makes me realize that Blob had so much potential not seen by the developer. If they ever reboot the series, I hope he gets some much needed love, because what they can do with him is endless. Another important element in these games are the levels, and Clayfighter's levels are, well, they're levels, that's for sure. They aren't as vertical or dynamic as Smash Bros stages, but I do think they have personality. They're certainly all unique with their own feel and theme. Take Ghastly Graveyard and Frozen Fortress for example. But at their base, they're just large, empty, open, flat areas for you to fight in. Each level does contain 1 or 2 sub-areas, and you can access these areas by kicking or tossing your opponent through doors placed around each level. But even still, these levels are all missing one very important thing: variety. As they all play out the exact same way, every single time. You just start, punch, kick, punch, then it's over. An insane wacky premise like Clayfighter could have done some hilarious and wild things with props or stage hazards. Hell, even Celebrity Deathmatch had those things and that game was absolute trash. What a missed opportunity, man. Another thing is that the levels aren't exactly two-dimensional like those of Smash or Mortal Kombat. Pressing the L or Z buttons will move your character forward and back, rotating your view. But this is more or less a useless feature. The only times I ever needed to press L or Z during all my playtime for this video was to mitigate and get away from foreground obstructions. And holy shit, what do you want in your dream tournament fighter? Good fatalities? No? Perhaps memorable levels? Not really your speed? How about having a giant candy cane, boxes, and other random shit get in your way and block you from seeing what you're doing? Yeah? Well, hey, I knew we'd fulfill your needs eventually. Thanks for shopping with us. Fucking bullshit. I mean, this type of thing doesn't happen all the time, but when it does happen and you take a super move to the face because you can't see in order to block in time, it'll frustrate the absolute shit out of you, trust me. While we're on the topic, Clayfighter in general seems to control fine to me, but again, I'm not super well versed in this genre, so I don't really know what I'd compare it to. But from what I've read online, tournament fighter aficionados didn't really like this game either. A lot of them said in forums that the controls were delayed, amongst other things. And I can see their point for sure. One thing I could never figure out was how to pull off super moves or claytalities. Yes, claytalities. It also doesn't help that I'm using this shitty pitchfork with a worn joystick. I even looked up a moves list online and I have absolutely no idea what any of this even means. To me, it's just a random string of meaningless letters. Even after presumably deciphering it correctly, I still couldn't pull one off. And I tried for you guys, I really did. At the end of the day, Clayfighter 63 1/3 is definitely a game that puts its humor out front, with spotlights on for all to see. Even the name Clayfighter 63 1/3 is kind of a jab at Nintendo and the N64 itself. You know how a lot of N64 games have the 64 suffix? Yeah, it's making fun of that. And a lot of the humor in this game has aged relatively gracefully. Well, certainly more so than Celebrity Deathmatch's humor. This is due in part to Clayfighter's overall non-reliance of pop culture to get their gags across. Sure, there are a few in there, but those jokes are typically very easily recognizable. The game focuses more on gross-out humor than anything else. I'll give Clayfighter 63 1/3 2 out of 5 stars, with the tagline all style, no substance. Because while Clayfighter 63 1/3 is unique and charming with its claymation style and humor, there's hardly any game there to keep you charmed, even through the honeymoon phase. And in terms of the story, once it's done, it's done. You're not going to lay awake at night wondering what effects killing Dr. Kiln would have on the overall geopolitical stage of the larger Clay world. You just kinda shrug and turn the game off. But still, despite its flaws, I do have a soft spot for this game. Its humor charmed the hell out of me when I was a kid, and it still charms me a bit to this day. It's a game I can fully admit sucks, but I love it nonetheless. But what about all of you? Did you remember Clayfighter 63 1/3? Did any of you rent the infamous Sculptor's cut from Blockbuster back in the day? Let me know down in the comments. Lastly, I'd like to thank you all for watching. I appreciate it loads. But as for me, I'm out. Have yourself a wonderful day.